Now, one of our community's favorite people is with me in studio, Louw. Every time I talk to you, we get lots of interest in whether it's a podcast or a video, but my goodness, what have you been up to now? Punching with your organization that you started, the Free Market Foundation, at a time when this country needs it more than ever, some kind of free enterprise thinking. You got to just go back and tell us what is going on here, because you sent a letter out last week, which I received on Friday, to say this organization that you started in co-founded in 1975, that you have been synonymous with for many years, is now on the wrong path. You are resigning as president, you are leaving as a member, and you're having a pretty tough time with the chairman and the executive director.
Yes, it goes back actually 3 or 4, even 5 years. And the history very briefly is that when I started querying issues of concern regarding finances, and I asked the bank for bank statements, they said, sorry, you're no longer an authorized signatory. I think it was about 3 years ago. And I said, what? I'm the CEO. Who decided this? The board? Who? No. So somebody who I presume wanted to hide something did that. I could not get bank statements. I was the boss, and I could not get bank statements from my own staff.
But were you the boss? Because the allegation is that you weren't the boss anymore and that you were a president.
Oh, no,
not running the place anymore.
This was before, when I was CEO.
While you were still CEO
yes,
of the Free Market Foundation.
CEO, information was withheld
That's
from me.
That's bizarre. How does that happen?
I mean, I could have brought a legal action had I had the resources. I could maybe even have used the FMF to bring the legal action. But that is the question. How does it happen? And of course, with all stories, there are 2 sides, 2 realities, 2 truths, and sometimes more. I'm not a binary person. And, that's an explanation I've never received. I've never been told who did it, why did they do it, by what authority did they do it, and other things.
Who's they?
The answer is I don't know, but it's a group that I call the coalition or the cabal. And I can't think of a better name, and they are somewhat secretive. In other words, I became involved much later. A group called Stratcom was formed, and the members were known. There was no secret.
Stratcom. It's like the old apartheid Stratcom.
Well,
what a crazy name.
The name came from a guy who was part of that.
Oh, glory.
And is a very well-known person I won't name now, but supposedly converted, but it's not clear. And he was proud of having been part of that. I didn't realize at the time that the name was the same. Then I thought, oh yes, of course, apartheid Stratcom, a pretty evil organization, to put it mildly. Anyway, their organization, which they call the Camp, is mysterious. Nobody knows who they are, but I think they're a sort of amorphous moving target. And again, I don't want to name names, but they include people who have been lengthy colleagues of mine, trusted colleagues. And just to give you one of many, many examples of where things were going off the rails, and I found it more and more difficult to be part of what was happening, I walked into the office one day and there was a young man sitting there at a desk in an office. And I went in and introduced myself and said, hello, who are you? And he said, I work here. And I said, what? A qualified lawyer. By the way, the FMF is now full of lawyers, no economists, and it's meant to be an economic policy think tank. So another lawyer, and I said, who employed you? And he told me. And I said, but you employing somebody and incurring budget expenses without the CEO meeting the person? Was there a job search done? Did you publish it? Did you interview candidates? No, he just liked this person. So I employed him. And he has our values, whatever that means, because that's no longer what it was.
So this is going back 3 years. It came to a head, though, last week when you wrote an open letter.
Yes.
The Free Market Foundation have responded to your open letter to say that a lot of what you said, and it was very emotive, your open letter, although I suppose having been involved with it for nearly 50 years,
it's my life.
You're forgiven for being emotive. It's your life's work.
And it's crashing, or crashed.
Why?
Well, the ethos has changed completely, the value system. You remember, and you were instrumental, if I'm allowed to say so, to some of our funding when you were in charge of a budget that could do that, and you were an extraordinarily good friend of the FMF that was. What you knew and supported is no longer recognizable. We were politically neutral, we stuck to policy, we were dignified.
Even the ANC used to embrace you, or at least talk to you, listen to you.
Well, the ANC right now has the socio-economic impact assessment, which I was consulted by them to introduce, you see. So even now with the EFF, we're working with the EFF in a shanty town, trying to get them title deeds. So we were always apolitical, non-aligned with any other group, liberal, conservative, didn't matter, no political affiliation or alignment, spoke to all political parties across the spectrum. I even did a presentation on free market economics to the Eugene Terreblanche's outfit, and to NUM, the current president, Ramaphosa, arranged for me to do a presentation on privatization to the National Union of Mine Workers in the dark days of the struggle. Now, you've got to have a lot of neutrality, which I have. I am not here to join or advance any interest. I'm here to advance ideas.
And has that changed at the Free Market
Totally
Foundation?
Changed, yes. They now openly declare war on the ANC. They call ANC people crooks and charlatans and despots.
But aren't they?
That is, I don't know. It's not my field of expertise. My field of expertise is economic policy.
But we know we've got the Zondo Commission. But I suppose the point is that if they are crooks and despots and criminal enterprises, Helen Ziller mentions it, it's not a think tank's place.
No.
To be making those assertions. Is that your thesis?
Absolutely. And not on even more than that. It is the think tank's job to go to them and try and persuade them how to do things better, which is what we do. And we, until as literally as recently as last month, had significant policy changes made by the government, and we distinguish, by the way, between the government and the party, as everybody should. That unfortunately fell away under the Nats, under the apartheid regime, and has never been restored. The distinction between the two. Our job is to influence the government. Our job is to get the government of the day to govern better or less. And that is gone.
Not just to rant and say they're wrong. I get it now. I see where you're coming from.
And bang the table and call people names and alienate people. The current new FMF, which we can get to how it became taken over, has no more relevance. You can't have relevance if you alienate people. It is palsied up with one political party to the exclusion of others.
Which one?
The DA. And I have always have had a lot to do with what used to be called the Progressive Party, the IFP, federal parties are the ones like it used to be, the DA. And that seems to be returning. I've been banging the federalism drum, devolve, get power closer to communities, and the ANC went towards centralization. And that, I think, was a big mistake. And again, they were copying the Nats. That's what the Nats did, centralized power. And they just inherited this mindset. So the FMF now, in my view, is no longer worthy of my input. I'm still a member. I'm still the president. And I'm on the board.
But you have resigned?
No, I've announced my resignation in 3 months. Yeah, which is my contract. I've submitted my contract to resign. And I want to be relevant. I want to bring about a freer, better, more prosperous world. And that requires very careful economic policy and thinking. So, for example, I'll give you a concrete example. When they say expropriation without compensation, you can either rant, which white people mostly do, if one or two black people, a few, about how bad this is. And, you know, it's going to cause the economy to decline. Or what you can do is you can say, I understand why you want to do this. Can we find ways that are that could actually promote growth as well as doing, you know, land transformation? For example, give every black South African now occupying a piece of land ownership, a title deed. We're talking about 10 million people. We're talking about more than doubling or trebling the size of the current deed registry and injecting what FNB estimates to be something like over 2 trillion rand into the economy. That can be done easily, positively. You bring about, we'll have more black landowners than white landowners, and the economy will be boosted. And to do that, you have to persuade not just the currently so-called ruling party, but all parties. You have to actually go to the Vryheidsfront and the EFF and Action SA and IFP and so on and say, why don't we do this? This is a way of bringing about land ownership and transformation.
Leon, I understand it, and in fact, it's classic liberalism, isn't it?
Yes.
Peter Brown's a wonderful biography on Peter Brown started off with a saying that you should be opening people's eyes, not poking them out with a stick.
Yes.
But in the contemporary South Africa, it appears, and even in my industry, in media, it appears as though there is a swing towards supporting or crusading on behalf of one part as against another, i.e., I remember having a recent conversation with someone and saying, my colleague Michael Apple, and saying, but there's a good ANC and a bad ANC. And he said, what? Is there really? And it's not Michael's issue, but it is held within South Africa that you, with one organization or with another, this is a difficult time that the country's going through. And if the battle for ideas has become what appears to have happened at the Free Market Foundation, if of all places, if that becomes endemic, we could be in real trouble.
Yes, I think it's very important to realize that all the political parties have rotten apples. All the political parties have skeletons in the cupboard, some conspicuously less than others. But there's another non-binary way of looking at this. Firstly, are there 2 ANCs? Are there 3 or 4 ANCs? I mean, 2 is too limiting.
True.
And what do they do? And there's some wonderful people in the ANC with whom I work and whom I've got to know. And pretty much every other party. I could literally say to you, people I deal with, in pretty much all the parties, I consider to be wonderful people, committed to the country. Now, we can look at what has happened under the ANC, or whichever ANC one is talking about. I don't think it's any more a single party in any meaningful sense of the word, and it should actually have broken up, the alliance should have broken up really in 1995 or before. So let's look at what is happening. We all see this whinging about the potholes and about the water supply and the load shedding and so on. Well, of course, those are very, very unfortunate stuff. But I would encourage everybody who's feeling depressed about South Africa to go to Stats SA and look up all the statistics on the quality of life indices, life expectancy, healthcare, literacy, housing, services, whatever you look at, incomes, they've all improved. So everything's been going up, almost everything. Unemployment, of course, has been going down spectacularly and horrifically. But even there's a silver lining on the big dark cloud, which is that people have jobs in the unrecorded or informal sector. They're all working all the time.
Well, Gigi Alcock was here last week, and he says, and he's a specialist in the informal economy, he says the real unemployment rate is 12%, not 40%. Yes. He might be he might be a little optimistic, but clearly what you're talking about now is hope.
Yes.
And is that the reason why you've given up on the Free Market Foundation, your creation?
It's purely negative, purely critical, focuses on the issues that concern white elites. I'm concerned with the majority of South Africans. I don't like to classify people by color, but unfortunately the reality is that if you're working with the poor, with the street vendors, informal traders, shantytown dwellers, people who don't have title in tribal villages, etc., then you are almost overwhelmingly dealing with black South Africans. And I wish the color weren't the issue, but just the poverty and the need for upliftment and jobs. I'm not obsessed with, expropriation without compensation or the Expropriation Act or whatever. Frankly, you will not have your property expropriated ever. You know that, which is why your property value is still going up, because everyone knows that.
Well, I'm not so sure about that here in Joburg, but anyway, good point.
But whose property will be expropriated? Now, this is the sick part of it. And I want to see AfriSACA and Agri-SA and, of course, the Free Market Foundation, which for the time being is me. I raise this issue all the time. I want to see people saying, the real victims of expropriation without compensation will be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of poor people whose land is routinely and has always been routinely expropriated without compensation because they want to build a park or a clinic or a road or services or whatever. They get no compensation. When the people on the west bank of Alec, which is its worst shantytown, get their properties expropriated, they get nothing. They just have their houses bulldozed down and chased away by police with dogs.
Leon, getting back to this issue, how did you, as the founder of this organization, allow it to get to where it is now, and to a point where, even as the founder, after nearly 50 years, you stepping away?
I made big mistakes. We always had what we called a family. It was harmonious. There was no control. Everybody governed themselves. Everybody was trusted. If the receptionist said she was going to a training college or business trip to Cape Town, nobody would query it, and we never had any reason to suspect anyone. The culture has completely changed. We never had a resolution. We never voted on anything. We discussed and reached agreement congenially. That is now the opposite. Everything is a laborious vote, one person after another, not even just a count. Everything is authoritarian. For example, you might have noticed that my mailing came from a mailing company, not from the Free Market Foundation. Why? Because a system of strict censorship has been created, completely alien to our values. How did this happen? Because I let it. My mistake was to keep hoping that somehow these signs that things were going wrong would go away. This culminated in the 2020 AGM, in which there was a so-called proxy war, and in which the other side, the other camp, lost overwhelmingly, and that was that. And then 2 months later, they simply announced that they were the board and physically took over the office. Took over the staff, said the staff could no longer do anything without the permission of a person, not a chief executive officer. There isn't one. It was abandoned. The board has actually become an executive board.
But couldn't you, and we are publishing your letter and the right of reply for the FMF as it now stands on BizNews, but couldn't you have found a successor? I mean, you're getting on now. Neither of us are as young as we once were, but they often say that that's the greatest test of leadership is succession planning. Did you neglect that?
No, I worked hard at it. I tried to get succession planning in. I developed a very sophisticated, with Brian Benfield, our then executive chairman, a chair of the executive committee, a very sophisticated training program, wanted to put people through it. I actually discussed with potential successors in the FMF, but for such a thing you would have to do a search and see who's more available. Who knows, it could have been Alec Hogg. But I did that and was thwarted. The person who's now mainly in control is in his 80s, let alone me in his early 70s. So I am totally against this. I am for succession planning. I've always been for it, and that is one of the many things I was trying to do that was sabotaged.
So what now? You have relationships with funders who've been donating very, very, in fact, recently even more than ever. And you now stepping away. Are you going to tell those funders to withdraw their support?
I have raised almost all the FMF's money over its 50 years. including the bigger sums that you're talking about more recently, and the first time the FMF has had any meaningful large capital. I have to tell funders and members and you and the public that I believe the FMF has been corrupted and converted into an organization that, unless it's rescued, which is still my objective, I'm still keen to get it back to the ethos and the values and the principles, internal principles, no secrecy, openness, transparency. I will have to, where I was going was tell them, that was my fiduciary duty, my obligation, and I've already fulfilled that. And don't know what I'll do. I'll continue doing policy work, either independently.
But surely, Leon, right now in this stage, and getting back to something we said earlier to conclude this discussion with, it's never been more important in the battle for ideas in South Africa on which direction the country is going to go to. Now, much of the free enterprise approach that you've championed at the Free Market Foundation is what appears around the world to be the right way to go forward, and certainly for this country where we've tried everything else and it hasn't worked. But now that you don't have that voice, are you going to be the new voice for it?
But if I stay there, I wouldn't have that voice either, because it's not what it now does.
My point is, the Free Market Foundation doesn't have that voice. Would you be creating that voice in some way?
So absolutely. I'm exploring all sorts of options. People have come forward, offered money to create a new, authentic Free Market Foundation. But you're absolutely right. The one thing the country needs now is let's call it the old or authentic or real Free Market Foundation.
Leon Louw, co-founder of the Free Market Foundation, soon to be ex-president and ex-member of the Free Market Foundation. I have a feeling we're going to be having more chats in future. Thank you. I'm Alec Hogg.
And thanks for the great work you do.
I'm Alec Hogg from BizNews.com.